Thank you very much, everybody. To quote Santa Fe's favorite abstract artist, Georgia O'Keeffe, my world is beautiful, it's impossible, but I'm pleased to be here. It's been a delightful time, and I thank you, Will, and I want to thank Casey, and I want to thank David as well for their hospitality and their generosity. I've got a chance to talk to a lot of you, and you know, the typical conversation is, you know, what's your field, economics or mathematics or computer science? And I say, mine's sports law, and they said, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Your field is sports law? And in some ways, this represents what I do in my life. And I've been blessed to live the life Thoreau said we should all lead, and that is to live the life you dream. And I've also been blessed to follow William James in the sense that William James said that our life experiences amount to those things that we care about. And I was fortunate to have a mom that realized I had a lot of energy as a young kid and threw me in a pool. And I had an ability to kind of move through the pool, you know, with some fluidity. Not as fast as Michael Phelps, but it was a different era. And a lot of what I've got to say, the kind of things, the artificial intelligence, the changes in technology impact the world of sports. But this is where I start, this simple little ball. And some of you, especially the Americans among us, are familiar probably with Deflategate. Deflategate went on for a year and a half. We have a lot of Cambridge people here. I'm sorry, David, not your Cambridge, but the other Cambridge people. Not sure, exactly. Exactly. It's probably even worse. Yeah, we won't even talk about Manchester United or Manchester City or any of their problems. But this little ball was the source of a year and a half of litigation, more or less, litigation in a broad sense. Why? Because the NFL has a rule. They have a rule for everything. And I'm going to talk a little bit about pro sports, but more about college sports, which I know a little bit more about because it's an operating system that it's easier to sort of tear apart and see where we could change it and how we could change it. NFL has a rule. This ball has to be inflated between 12.5 and 13.5 pounds. The rule doesn't say what temperature you inflate it at. Do you inflate it at room temperature? Do you inflate it at playing field temperature? And the playing field temperature in the day in question was about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. It was cool and it was rainy. And the NFL rule said that the home team has to have 12 of these balls. 12 of these balls. And they have to have that 12.5 to 13.5 pound with the little standard deviation. And they have to be Wilson brand. That's important because licensing affects a lot of how these systems work. Wilson brand, it has to have the official signature of Roger Goodell, who is the czar, so to speak, commissioner, perhaps a better term, of the National Football League. It has to have a certain circumference and a certain axis. And all 12 have to be measured. And all 12 are measured by the referee. He then hands them to my friend Colin here. We're talking about Colin because he's a runner like me. And sort of the ball boys, kind of, so to speak. And they take them back, because this is done, I think it's 2 hours, it has to be done 2.5 hours before game starts. So they take them back into the training area. And what we believe happened, if you believe the Wells report, which is a report that the commissioner of the NFL had prepared, is that 11 of the 12 balls had pressure below 12.5. One was within the 12.5, 13, 11 of the 12 were not. So how did that happen? Well, the way they believe it happened is because, and this is where sort of topical environmental information is important, because they read about quarterbacks. Some quarterbacks like the ball hard, some quarterbacks like the ball softer. Some quarterbacks like Aaron Rodgers has a huge hand, and he wants the hardest ball he can grip. Others, their hand is smaller. So they figured it's got to be the quarterback. It's got to be the quarterback because they know on the field what it is the QBs like to do. And they didn't necessarily know Tom Brady, the starting quarterback for the Patriots, but that's what they thought. So they began to ask questions. Now you need to know that the system, the NFL system, was probably out to get Brady and more specifically the coach of the New England Patriots for a prior event called Spygate involving technology, where Bill Belichick actually, this is during a Jets practice, actually puts his employees in Jets outfits, goes to watch as though they're just Jets officials, and they're filming the Jets practices before they play the Patriots. The Jets find out about it, the NFL gets upset, but Bob Kraft is on the executive committee. Bob Kraft's president of the Patriots, and was responsible for bringing Goodell in and voting him in as a commissioner. So there was a close relationship. So they got a wrist slap. That was it. The rest of the owners, for the most part, were not very happy about that. And in my view, this is kind of a payback. Deflategate is just a payback for that. And systems do that sometimes. You all watch sports, right? They make one bad call, and then 5 minutes later they make another bad call, but the other bad call is for the other team, right, to sort of balance it out. So they began to inquire. And what they realized is there were a series of texts, informational texts, ball boys, equipment boys, and who but Tom Brady. Say, wow, that's very interesting. And in the text, they do make references to, perhaps doing something with this ball. So Bob Kraft immediately does a mea culpa. The Patriots lose a draft choice, which I actually thought was the worst part of the whole thing, and give $1 million that goes to some NFL charities. And Tom Brady didn't. And the reason he didn't, which is an important thing to know, is because he was a member of a union. And in pro sports in this country, organized team sports, we have a different relationship than we have in college sports, because pro sports relationship is Players Association, i.e. union guild, versus management. And we'll talk a little bit about the history of that. So Brady goes to his union for the most part and says, listen, I'm not going to accept the penalty. I'm not going to accept being suspended for 4 games, which seemed like an unfair penalty in light of the so-called crime, especially because the evidence was circumstantial. And of course, in the evidentiary process, the NFL wanted Tom Brady's cell phone. And Brady said, I destroyed all my cell phones. We can't get the logs. and apparently Brady destroys his cell phone and gets a new phone number because he's a celebrity, and people hack into it and people have access and all that sort of stuff. Maybe hard for us to understand, but I think there perhaps were legitimate reasons for Brady doing it. So meanwhile, and despite AT&T or Verizon, whoever it was, they actually couldn't find on Brady's side what he had texted back. So what does he do with his union? He has to do it with his union. They file suit in federal court, and then that goes up on appeal. Brady actually wins, goes up on appeal to a federal district court, and the federal district court said, no, absolutely. And absolutely the commissioner has the authority to do what he did. And the reason he has that authority, it's all embedded in the collective bargaining agreement, which is another system. Because the system said in the event of a dispute over like a rules violation, it goes to the commissioner. Commissioner hires an independent, so-called independent party, Ted Wells. He comes back with his evaluation. The Brady and his lawyers can respond somewhat. They are unhappy with the result. Federal court says, Brady, you're right. Your due process rights were violated. On appeal, the court said, absolutely not. It's in the contract. It's in that Constitution that you talked about today. This is my life. My life is a relationship to fans to this, to owners to this, to players to this, and to agents to this. That's my life. And while I was never an NFL player, I was an okay swimmer and okay runner too. And happened to be a teammate of Mark Spitz in '72, made the national team, didn't make the Olympic team. In fact, I think somewhere in here it says I was an Olympian. I was not an Olympian. And the difference between being an Olympian and in the Olympic trials is the difference between, as Will Rogers says, between lightning and the lightning bug, and I was a lightning bug. Okay. I only have one slide, and I have to tell you I only have one slide. And you know why? The night before, Casey Cox said, okay, get your slides into me. We have a friend that sends this really funny, I think it's a YouTube video, of mocking TED Talks. And it's hysterical. It's like got these graphs and charts that go every which way, and then it has a picture of the Earth or the globe, and it talks about, the global. And I said, and then he goes in the middle, and like if you say things 3 times, like complexity, simplicity, and robust, you say it 3 times, everybody agrees, regardless of what context. I said, that's me. I said, I can't do this. So I sent Casey a little note. I said, Casey, and I'm an artist too. I draw, I sketch all the time. I had this. The opening slide was a reference to looking through the Lewis Carroll's looking through the looking glass. Thank you. And it was I'd done Alice and the plum pudding. And the Red Queen takes the plum pudding away. I thought, this is great, it's in color. And I was going to analogize to this great legal teacher that Jillian should know, Carl Lowell, who was the dean of her law school, and who in the 1930s taught at Columbia Law School. And he gave a series of lectures, became embedded in a book called The Bramble Bush, which is my all-time favorite book about the law, what the law means to society, what the law means to law students, and I go back to it all the time. And Llewellyn talks about, and this is, I think, a principle that was discussed yesterday. Think of the law this way, and we'll connect it to this operating system called sports. Reason and rule. Rule and reason. You take out the reason, what's the use of the rule? Reason and rule, rule and reason. Llewellyn said you take out the reason, why the rule? Why do I say that? College sports. There, all right? College sports. You got to go back to, I don't know when the first college football game is, probably 1870 or something like that, Harvard and Yale or at Cambridge Place. Now, actually, Harvard, it was Rutgers, College of New Jersey. I think they were one of the first. But anyway, 1905, three most popular sports in college were wrestling, football, and boxing, and baseball shortly behind it. 1905, 25 college players died on the gridiron. There were no rules. It was Darwinian survival. And you know what? That is the way they wanted it. Because they said, this is how our best and brightest, they need to survive this gladiator-like situation. And Teddy Roosevelt, probably the best athlete that we've had, although I need to tell you that the younger Bush was actually a pretty good athlete too. Colin will appreciate this. I got to know him, and he actually corresponded with me about training, about how to go faster at a mile. And he wasn't a bad miler. He was like a 6-minute miler when he was 40. That's not bad. Anyway, so Teddy Roosevelt said, this is nuts. So he gathers the presidents of the major colleges, of what we call the Big Ten schools today, and the Ivies. And this was a time when Penn and Harvard and Yale were really the best, some of the best college football programs. Puts them together and says, you guys got to do something. So there's this disruptiveness taking place in college sports. And if you think, the playing field is ugly today, it was ugly then, and it's always been ugly. It's always been ugly. It's never been that pristine, pure kind of thing that you imagine it to be. Here's the aftermath of that. Those college presidents got together and formed, and keep this in mind, a private, voluntary organization called the National Collegiate Athletic Association. Its primary principle, and this didn't come until the early 1950s, its reason for existence is to maintain what I called the myth. My wife, who is a writer, said, no, Joseph Campbell says it's a fairy tale. The fairy tale of the student athlete, the amateur student athlete. I assure you, every single bylaw, every single principle, and the 500-page document that governs intercollegiate sports is based on this fallacy. It's a noble thought. It's a noble thought. I mean, I grew up in an environment of body, mind, and spirit, and I believe that. I believe there's that correlation. But to put together a system and stay with this system from 1952 to 2017 almost, in a world that's changed vastly. Well, how has that world changed? Well, let's talk about money, right? How about money? Talk about money. Coach from Michigan, anybody know how much money he makes? $10 million a year. Holy cow. NCAA, March Madness. You're going to be in Austin in next March, and maybe you'll be lucky to see an NCAA men's basketball tournament game. Yeah, these are nice events. 64 team, that's like 68, but they they have a couple of playing games. How much money? How much money does the NCAA get from that tournament every year? $1 billion. $1 billion. If you're a Division I football player, and the NCAA has 3 different divisions, Division III, 2, and 1. Division III schools cannot offer scholarships based on athletic talent. It's a myth. They get around it so many ways. It's another myth or fairy tale. So here we have this system that generates all this revenue. And what if a player, major college, male or female, basketball player, volleyball player, things of that sort, wanted to somehow profit in any manner or fashion? The pushback from the NCAA is unbelievable. And that, unfortunately, they have legal precedent. The legal case goes back, and some of you may remember a coach from University of Nevada, Las Vegas, because it's close enough to you, named Jerry Tarkanian, the Tark. The Tark was an interesting guy. And one day, Sports Illustrated sent a photojournalist to UNLV to just see what was going on. And the infamous shot of a hot tub with most of his basketball players smoking cigars with drinks, and they identified all the Jersey mob, in that same hot tub. So the sanctity of the game was in question. It just didn't look good. It didn't look good. Now, Tarkanian had a running collusion in terms of with the NCAA. He didn't like them, and they didn't like him. And partly, here's what Tarkanian did. He recruited at-risk kids that nobody else could take. There's no question about it. Did they graduate? No. But you know what? Maybe they were better off being under Tarkanian's tutelage than in Detroit or Chicago and some of these other places. I mean, that's a moral judgment that, we can save for later. So Tarkanian, UNLV says, didn't matter how many national championships they played in. The NCAA literally told UNLV, if you don't fire this guy, we're going to come down on our infractions committee on you as we've never done before. And so what did they do? They gave him a cursory hearing, and then they fired him, notwithstanding all the alums saying otherwise. All right. What's Tarkanian say? Tarkanian says, wait a minute, this archaic college system, which seemingly sports system is just run for administrators and presidents of universities, where's my due process? So Tarkanian sued in a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the court said, because the NCAA is a private, voluntary member organization, Tarkanian has no due process rights before that organization. And by extension, the NCAA maintains the position that no student athlete has a single due process rights unless they want to grant it. And what do you think the chances they grant them? Let's take some examples. All right? A college kid from Georgia got a football scholarship. His season is over. It's springtime. He wants to go with his friends on a vacation. He doesn't have any money. He has a jersey that was given to him for his participation in a bowl game. He puts it on eBay. NCAA violation. That same jersey is sold at the bookstore at the University of Georgia for $36 with his name on it. Madden, video games have a large role in this particular system. The NCAA, through the College Licensing Corporation, licensed the rights, the publicity rights, which is, in this case, are the lookness rights, of all NCAA football, basketball players to a company called EA Sports, video thing. And so they have EA, Madden, college football, 2010, 2011, et cetera. And all of a sudden, remember, the players that are at the university in question, they have no due process rights. Because they, believe it or not, all signed a waiver. They had no idea what this waiver meant. It basically says that you're assigning to the college your publicity rights. Well, you know what publicity rights meant back when I was in school? That meant that the school would send to your hometown newspaper the fact that you were competing in a sport and maybe got third in some event or something like that, and your picture. Did anybody in their wildest dreams think that that waiver, literally the same language that I signed decades ago, morphed into a full licensing agreement to allow my image to appear on Madden games. It had everything but the name of the player. If you were Tim Tebow, was a left-handed quarterback, won 2 Heismans at the University of Florida, they had Tebow, left-arm quarterback, exact body type, his number when he played at Florida, and you could download software with Tim Tebow's lifetime statistics at the University of Florida. So you got to be kidding me. The players at the university, they had no due process rights. However, a UCLA player named Ed O'Banner was a really good college basketball player, and a kid who was a quarterback at Rutgers brought lawsuits. And they said, wait a minute, if we signed those waivers were only good for that period of time when we were at the college. We're not at the college anymore. Therefore, you need a new waiver. You need a new licensing agreement. And they won that case. But the court said, well, okay, starting in 2020, you can now pay players, football players, and men's basketball players, and even women basketball players, a little money. It's never going to be more than $3,000 a year, above and beyond scholarships. One more example, the myth. Northwestern University, 3 years ago, some of the private university, some of the players said, we're going to do what Major League Baseball did in 1952. 1952, the same time that the NCAA imposed this amateurism principle, reason, on this operating system called college sports. Literally the same time, the players, many players in Major League Baseball were fed up with their inability to dictate simple things like who they work for and how long they work for them. The legal term is free agency. And free agency is important for athletes, celebrities, as for any of us. Because you're concerned about where your kids go to school, and maybe where your spouse lives and where she grew up. These things mattered. And baseball was making money, too. Unlike some sports later on, but at least baseball was making money. So baseball did what no sport players had ever done, and they petitioned the National Labor Relations Board to be recognized, to allow to have the vote, and then ultimately to be recognized as an association, a players' association, union, or guild. For our purposes, they all mean the same thing. And the definition of employee is pretty simple, and that is you work for somebody and get paid, which was the same definition that the players from Northwestern used when they originally won their effort before the National Labor Relations Board in Chicago. They were the board said, salary is payment, is compensation. Therefore, you're an employee. So that was the model that these Northwestern players were looking at. Let me tell you real briefly what happened in the aftermath after the players' unions organized. Salaries went up 46% the next year. 46% in 1 year of negotiation. Now, they had a tough negotiator. And I think this is an important thing to remember when we all talk about systems and systems cracking and trying to model it. And I maybe Senator Utah kind of mentioned it, but I'm a big believer in leaders and statesmen. I've been on a lot of teams. I've captained more national teams than you can count. And I want to tell you, leadership matters. It really, really matters. And I don't know how you embed that in code. And Marvin Miller, the first executive director of the Major League Baseball Players Association, was an amazing leader for the interest of professional baseball players. And then what followed is National Football League followed, which allowed Brady to at least have a players' union to appeal a response by the commissioner that he thought was unfair. And so then soccer did it, and then hockey did it. But here's the point, back to college sports. We have a dysfunctional system based on a reason, on a principle that no longer works. And at some point, the system is going to fail. And in my belief, it's near failure. It's unsustainable. The revenue streams coming into colleges is immense. It's absolutely immense. I mean, while we're sitting here, you can go to ESPN. Go in your room and look at ESPN. How many different games are taking place and how much money? And each of those little regional ESPN college games are worth a couple $100,000. Just multiply it. You get into the finals for the playoffs, NCAA football now, it's $15, $16 million to your university. University of Texas makes makes, after cost, their football team makes over $100 million a year. One team, one sport, one university. It's like, wow. So the model's unsustainable. The system is going to break down. And you have all these forces, these bolts of lightning that are coming. The next big issue that's going to hit it, it's already hit it now, is concussions. And I would ask how many of you saw the movie, but the problem is this is a movie that cost $54 million to make and only grossed $46 million, which meant almost nobody went to see the movie. But the movie had an impact. Because if the NFL and college football and Pop Warner football don't address this issue better, there will be no football. I'm sure many of you are the parents of kids. And just like President Obama was asked, he loves college sports. We know that. He plays basketball all the time. And he said, if your two daughters were boys, would you let them play? And he said, I have to think about it. And you will have to think about it. But here's where technology can play a role. So concussion is another one of those forces that are impacting the system, this operating system of college football. In the slides I didn't have, I had a chart of just the board of governance of the NCAA. It's worse. It's almost as long as the preamble for the Yugoslavian Constitution. It is unbelievable. And you know what? There's not a single voice for the student athlete, so-called student athlete. It's a myth that can't sustain itself. There are just too many pressures. And also pressures from Congress as well. So how do we solve that? Given that I've tried to identify the problem a little bit, so I've identified some failure. How do we fix it? Well, the unionization of players isn't going to work because what happened was the regional NLB in Chicago agreed with the players they could unionize. When it went up to the full National Labor Relations Board, and I can tell you there was a lot of political pressure for this, they said no. And the reason they said no was if we allow private college students at schools like Northwestern or Harvard or Columbia or Miami or Vanderbilt to pay their players more under a market system, and the public schools cannot do it because many of the public states, they've gotten smart. So they've gotten legislation that specifically says student athletes cannot unionize. So now you have state statutes, and the NLRB didn't want to get involved in that. So those football, basketball people are ahead of the curve a little bit. So they've got things in place, laws in place that won't let them unionize. There'll be too much disparity because high school athletes and transfer students from two-year schools, they're free agents. They go wherever they want. And who isn't going to go to Northwestern or Vanderbilt if you're going to get scholarship plus 20 and you can only go to USC's a private school. You only go to maybe Cal Berkeley for the cost of your scholarship. There's also a movement afoot by a lot of people that are interested in this stuff is to do what happened in the Olympics. So this is my other model to think about. And the Olympics have a long history. And you probably know we sort of rejuvenated them in 1896. It was for men only. And it wasn't until 2 decades later that women could compete. And in this country, it's now run by an organization called the U.S. Olympic Committee, another private voluntary organization, non-government funded. So that gets to that due process issue again, and fairness and justice, and all those rights regarding disciplinary actions and things of that sort. So it was a mess as equal to as college sports was in the early 1900s, up until like a perfect example, 1936. Greatest athlete in the world, 1936, and Jesse Owens, wins 4 gold medals. You should look at what he did before he won those 4 gold medals when he was competing at Ohio State. He went to one track meet and set 5 world records in one day, competing in a little Big Ten track meet. It was off the chart. And it wasn't just his performance, but what did he do is he shut down Hitler's sense of the superiority of the Aryan race. He competed at the Olympics as a member of the Amateur Athletic Union, the same agency that I competed when I was a young kid. And after the Olympics in Berlin, he wanted to go back home. The AAU said, you can't go back home because we need to make money off you. You're our money machine. And he left. He went back home, and you know what the AAU did? They suspended Jesse Owens for life. For life. Because he wouldn't follow the money tree. It got bad in the Olympics in this country. Those kinds of battles with the NCAA. You know, they didn't want any of their athletes to compete in the Olympics. We saw a little bit about Major League Baseball in terms of Major League Baseball is reluctant to have their Major League stars go play a game in Rio, so we'll let the minor league guys play. So finally, Jimmy Carter of all presidents said, I've had it. And there was lots of pressure, obviously, from different organizing groups. So Jimmy Carter did something that's absolutely major that is a model for what could happen in college sports. He created a commission to look at the matter and got Congress to pass a statute called the Amateur Sports Act. The Amateur Sports Act revolutionized Olympic sports in America. It eliminated a magic word that everybody hung on to, even in the Olympics, called amateur. No. And you had to be an amateur to compete at the Olympics. And if you received any sort of a benefit in any which way, you could be deemed not an amateur, and therefore you couldn't qualify to compete. And there are a whole bunch of examples there. So we create the Amateur Sports Act. But here's what it does. It gives due process rights to the people that matter most, and that is the athletes. And it gives all athletes in every national governing body, and just real quickly, we have the U.S. Olympic Committee. Every sport that's a Pan Am sport or an Olympic sport in this country has a national governing body. And at that level, 20% of every committee that matters has to be filled with the athletes. So the athletes have a voice that they don't have at the college level. And I was talking to Jillian about what's the relationship to sports other than, holding this football. I've done a lot for the different Olympic committees. And currently I sit on an adjudicatory board for the Sport of USA Triathlon. So I hear non-doping related disputes. And once upon a time, I did hear doping-related disputes, but that's now all taken out of everybody's hand and put with an organization called WADA, which is another sports organ, but they have some of their own issues if you follow the Russian scandals and things of that sort. So there's a precedent. Okay, there's a precedent for the president to call a commission, put together a commission, and let's look at it. And what can we do? And not every college athlete is a revenue producer. You've got to understand that. But some are. So what can we do? And I think the more important thing is to give a voice to those athletes that they currently don't have. And again, I think the Olympic Committee and that whole process, not that it's perfect, but it works so much better than it ever did. Everything about even the selection process. I've been the chief judge for 3 different Olympic trials and helped create the rules and senses of fairness and make sure that if there were problems, there were always appellate rights. These are important values to have in the system. Respect and honesty and justice and all those kinds of things. Where am I time-wise? I'm getting near the end. Okay. So isn't it good I just had one slide? Okay. How does artificial intelligence and machine learning and all this sort of stuff apply? I tell you, it's sports, it's amazing. First of all, just material science has changed sports. If you look at, say, swimsuits in the 1920s and 30s, they were all wool. And then I remember in the late 1950s, 1960s, they became nylon. Speedo had a nylon bathing suit. And then if you think to Beijing, remember Phelps and all those athletes wearing those full bodies with skin suits, simulated skin, it's like latex, gave 2%, 3% flotation advantage. I think there were 26 swimming events in Beijing. Don't quote me, but you can look it up. And I think there were 24 world records. Every world record was sent in one of those suits. Major technological changes. But then the question is it cheating? And I think the real challenges for sports organizations, whatever level, whether it's college, whether it's the Olympics, or whether it's pro, is in this area of whether it's genetic engineering, whether it's human cyborgs. The Paralympics are a perfect example, too, where we now have technology integrated into the body I'm in the category that I think it won't be long before artificially aided body can run the 100-meter dash or the 200-meter as fast as maybe everybody than Usain Bolt. And Usain Bolt is an outlier. I know folks like to model stuff. If you take Jesse Owens' 1936 race, it's on film, so we can watch it. And material science has changed, made athletes faster. Believe it or not, there's nobody as fast as Jesse Owens today, other than Usain Bolt. Usain Bolt would have been second in the Rio Games in the 100-meter dash. I'm sorry, Jesse Owens would have been second in the 100-meter dash in Rio and London. The only changes, not are physiological, are materials, equipment. So if you look at, let's talk about more machine stuff. If you look, we've got our good friends from the Netherlands here. Soccer is in some ways at least equal, if not ahead, in terms of using technology. In the Premier League in England, every single stadium has digital cameras where not only is the movement of every player marked on an XYZ coordinates, but every referee, every ball, every single movement. And what that allows them to do is predictive power. This is Moneyball to the power of 10. It's really what it is. It's Bill James statistical analysis, and not just analyzing past little facts, but current patterns, and then how do we integrate them into real live application. And FIFA, which is a governing body for soccer, does not allow the coaches to use that real time yet, but I think that's just a matter. And the same thing's taking place across America. If you look at an NFL game, every on the training side, I mean, they all have Microsoft Surface. And the reason they have Microsoft Surface is Microsoft paid $400 million to be the official licensed, laptop for the NFL. But it allows them to get some real-time information. Back to concussions real quick, and then Will's going to boot me off. Maybe Will, if you can catch this pass, I'll let you take me off this field. The technology in concussions is happening. The technological change is happening at a rapid pace. Watch Under Armour. Under Armour's got some new technology out there that's frankly going to, the Rydells of the world are no longer going to be making helmets. And it deals with material that can absorb hits. Also has sensors, so you can have real time to understand the impact of a hit. And so literally fans could know what kind of impact that 6'4", 285-pound defensive end did on a helpless quarterback. Now, all these changes in terms of sports and technology affect how systems run and how rules are made. But I'll go back to my original premise. You need to start with a sound reason. And whatever the aspect of sports is, if it's doping in terms of fairness or fair play, okay, that's a good reason. What's an appropriate rule? And have the rules as simple as can be. When I first started in this business, and I taught the first sports law class, non-law schools in 1979, and had been blessed to have two pioneers, Bob Waters, Afro-American, first Afro-American ever represent a player in America, football player, and Bob Berry at BC Law, and we have some BC people here too. And those are the two pioneers, and I studied under Bob Waters, who was my mentor. And he allowed me, and I'm going to share this to you, he allowed me to see the world through the eyes of a black man that I couldn't participate in myself. I was an agent for a long time. Most of my clients were Afro-Americans. And Bob was a conscience and a soul that I didn't have to help me understand when I would go to Europe to negotiate with Real Madrid, when I would go to the Ivory Coast or Cameroon to talk to players and World Cup teams and things of that sort. Again, leadership, statesmanship, and people that count. I'm done. Thanks. Oh, you have questions, don't you? Oh, that's right. I thought it was one of these, wasn't, you take your ball and, you go home. Okay, yeah, question, sure. Yeah.
Well, while people are thinking of a substantive question, maybe you could comment on things we wouldn't have seen in the press about Ryan Lochte's comment.
Oh, God, that's a really good question. Huffington Post asked me I have no idea. I have no idea why you guys asked me to do anything, let alone Huffington Post. But Huffington Post asked me to write about the Olympics, so I did. And Lochte was such an easy target, too. But what I really wrote about was, again, the fallacy of sports. We know about the Russian situation. I'll go back to Lochte in a minute. We know about the Russian situation in terms of just outright cheating, in terms of manipulating test results. But the world needs to know that there's this thing called therapeutic use exemption that exists in baseball, football, every Olympic sport. And I'm not going to pick on the Williams sisters, but I will tell you I used it in my Huffington Post piece that they asked me to write about. Is the Williams sisters, Serena and her sister together, have more than 15 therapeutic use exemptions, all dealing with steroids. And it is not very hard to get a therapeutic use exemption. It used to be really easy. And you just went to a doctor, and you would tell them. The big thing now is asthma. Every athlete in the world now has asthma. Why? So they can use an inhaler. Everybody knows why. It's the dirty little secret that nobody wants to talk about. And unless you're really in the sport, you don't know that it exists. I had a number, after I wrote that piece, a number of off-the-record Olympic officials said to me was, I'm very happy you brought that subject up, but try not to talk about it too much. So, okay, Ryan Lochte. This is recorded, right? You don't know what I wanted to say about Usain Bolt, but that'll be off the record. Hey, a 30-year-old juvenile. I mean, it's indefensible what he did, and his response to it. I have no idea why he had to fabricate that little piece. For me, the worst part, and I was a swimmer, and I told you, I was a teammate of Spitz at the Arden Hill Swim Club in 1972, and it was an amazing assembly of athletes, and it was incredible. Mike Burton, all the legends of swimming. And I've known Michael Phelps since he was 12, and really I painted his official portrait after the Beijing Olympic Games, and I create art for the Olympic Committee. I do the posters for the sport of triathlon, for instance. And so I had a chance to talk to Michael, because I get to Baltimore quite often because I have family there, about what the difference it was for Spitz in '72 and what it was like for Phelps when he was, went to Sydney and then, Athens, et cetera. And at some point, I said to Michael, I said, you know that you are the sport. You're the symbol of this sport. So your behavior matters. And Michael will be the first to tell you, and this is what I like most about Michael Phelps, not the fact that he's 6'4" and he has a 7'1" wingspan, which is enormous for somebody 6'4", and his hands are huge and his feet, but he's a stand-up guy. He is screwed up more times than you know. If anybody's from Michigan or knows anything about the University of Michigan, just call somebody and ask them, what happened in Ann Arbor when Michael Phelps was there? Those stories don't even get published. But Michael Phelps, he faces up to his crises. One, drunk driving, okay. But the second one was very interesting. This was the psychology of athletes. After the London Games, Michael Phelps had nothing to live for. When I represented athletes, my job was to make sure they thought about what they were going to do next. When I had kids that I represented, like football players that didn't graduate from college, I put a provision in that contract that pro team would pay for their college education, that they'd go back in the summer if they could, or do online learning. Now, we didn't have it back then. Michael was immature in a lot of ways, there's no question about it. But he wanted to commit suicide. That last, DWI was basically, this is it. I have no reason to live for. It is so hard as an athlete when you define yourself in one dimension. In many ways, and I'm being real honest with you folks, I've lived my life to make the Olympic team in swimming. I was blind to the fact that I was a better runner than I was a swimmer. People said, you're doing the wrong sport. Nope, I'm going to do it in swimming because my mom threw me in the water when I was 4 or 5, and I like the smell of chlorine. I think I can do it. No, I wasn't that good. I turned down a chance. My mom's German. I'm German by their law, and actually trained with the German Olympic team and walked away. And I said, I didn't feel right. I didn't speak the language, I didn't know the culture. It's not fair for some American who can't make his team to walk into another country just because, he can carry the flag of nationality. So I wouldn't have been happy with myself. But you know what? I think I'm in a better place than Spitz were a lot of those things because it forced me to be something more than just one little athlete. And I think that's a good lesson for all of us. And the other lesson when I give talks like this is not all first dreams come true. My first dream didn't come true. But you know what? My second dream came true. I had a lot of second dreams. It gave me a lot of personal satisfaction and growth and challenges too. Yeah. So Lochte immature. The worst part is that he leaves the couple of University of Texas kids that are underage, literally, having to buy their way out. And I can't blame the Brazilian government, the Brazilian people, because the lead up into that was, chaos at the Rio Games, that everybody's going to get mugged, that the water's polluted, et cetera. And this just bought into that mantra. And the NBC and Billy Bush was all over it, right? So, yeah.
So you alluded to it in passing, but I want to take you back to it. And it has to do with enhancement, which seems to me a continuum. As you say, there's incredible training regimes which feel benign. There's prosthetic augmentation in the Paralympics. There's, as you say, various ways of doping under the radar.
Sure.
And then there's the possibility in the future of embracing various forms of hybrid nature.
Mm-hmm.
What's the sort of thinking from inside? Are we going to experience a bifurcation where there will be two Olympics?
Yeah. I actually am somebody that is of the view that for adult athletes, that because this is the battle we're not going to win. The good guys are always going to be a step ahead of the bad guys. You talk to any molecular biologists or chemists, and they say all you got to do is manipulate a couple of molecules on a designer drug that you can't identify. And just you folks are probably maybe chemists know more than I do, but I know a little bit about DWI, not because of what you think, but I had some experience related to that equipment, and it just tests blood alcohol level. And if you're impaired driver because of marijuana or ecstasy or something else, it can't measure it. There is no objective measurement of those things. And good luck for the state, so to speak, to convict somebody who is operating impaired or under the influence without objective testimony. It's hard to do. So I am of the view for adult athletes, the pros, the elites that we're talking about, with medical supervision to allow them to do what we've done since the ancient Greek games. The Greek, in the early Olympics, they did the same thing. They had medicine potence, they had the powerful medicine. They took a step further. The reason we have the Olympic Village? It's not so, the city can revitalize itself. It is because the cheating was so rampant that the organizers felt in these city-states that if we put all the athletes together for 7 or 8 days before the event, they wouldn't kill each other, they wouldn't poison each other. Poisoning was a common occurrence. That's why we have the Olympic Village. So it's part of human nature. So I say medical supervision, go ahead. Let's open up that door. But genetic engineering, yeah, there are people that argue. Let's take Michael Phelps and even Spitz. Spitz in his day, and to give you an idea, just the differences, the physiological difference. Spitz is, I was 6 feet, 185 pounds. I was literally the biggest sprinter. I was a drop-dead sprinter in my day. If you look at the NCAA championships, there's nobody under 6'5" at about 190 pounds on the starting block for the 50-yard freestyle. These guys are mammoth. You all see them come out, the relay kids all come out. Remember, they're all, Spitz is like here. Phelps is like here. Some of these guys are, the guys from Texas are 6'7", 6'8", 220 pounds. It's unbelievable. And, the technology, even in swimming, has changed in terms of wearabilities, in terms of, you've got sensors on Under Armour's a pioneer in this, and sensors in terms of training jerseys and things of that sort. You name it, not just a simple heart rate monitor. You can measure sweat. You can measure a whole range of things, and then you take that and you compute it with the measurements they do on sleep habits and diet and psychological information, and we're getting closer to that athlete. But many people say that's actually a better model, because what we need to do is equalize things. Because somebody like Spitz, who had this ability to kick in the butterfly down as much as he could up, that nobody else in the world could do at that time, and somebody like Phelps have these natural genetic advantages. So maybe this is a way to level the playing field, to make it okay, for somebody else who doesn't have those to compete in that particular sport. Katie Ledecky, yeah, she's a little powerhouse. Yeah, she's a little powerhouse. Yeah, exactly. We'll see how long Katie can keep it up. Katie Ledecky, there's a great example. Katie Ledecky, how much money do you think Katie Ledecky could have made off the last Olympics? I'm going to guess $3 to $5 million a year. And if she had accepted that money, guess what? She couldn't compete as a student athlete at Stanford University. And she decided to go for the college experience. But if you look 4 years earlier, there was another high school girl that made that same choice, and she didn't do very well in college, and she didn't swim very well this year, and everybody now said, Missy Franklin, you should have taken that $3 million a year, because you're not going to get a dime in sponsorship. So sometimes the window is short. But there's a good example. Katie Ledecky, had we gotten rid of the fairy tale of the student athlete and allow her to be compensated for her performance, she could be making $3 million a year and compete. But she couldn't compete as an NCAA athlete. Yeah. And Phelps was a pro when he was sophomore, junior in high school. He already had sponsorship deals, sophomore, junior in high school. And if you can't identify with him, how about LeBron James? Is there a person in this room that doesn't think LeBron James was a pro when he was in high school? His high school games were moved to the University of Akron, so every game could be on some version of ESPN. As a high school senior, LeBron James drove a Hummer to high school. How many of your kids in high school drive Hummers? Where did that money come from? A Hummer. And you know what? The sports organization, the Ohio Athletic Association, would not even look into it. They didn't want to know. Why? They didn't want to kill the golden goose. They didn't want to kill. There's too much invested in LeBron. And again, LeBron didn't go to college, and then you have this crazy system. I'll let you ask a question. But if you're a college basketball fan, and we're going to make you a college basketball fan when you go to Austin for sure. It's one and done. We have these premier academic institutions, UNC, Duke, Indiana. They sign a high school player to play 1 year. And you want to know the real fallacy is that and they bring those high school kids in their summer, and they give them 12 to 16 credits. You don't even want to know what courses they take unless they're gifted. All you need is 12 credits to maintain your eligibility. So all they have to do is sign up for 12 credits that freshman fall semester and maintain some, academicness, a C. They could even fail a grade because they can balance it against the summer school courses they took. And then their second semester of their freshman year, all they have to do is sign up for courses. They don't even have to go to class if they know they're gonna leave college and make themselves eligible for the MBA. Is that not a fallacy? And that's what that model does. That's the problem. The reason is off. The principles are off. And this is what it leads to. The hypocrisy of any kid at Duke or UNC, one and done. And these are the coaches that our society, that our media holds up, is that, we want to emulate. Okay, questions?
I actually think we have to break for lunch now, but
Okay.
Michael, thank you very much.